I speak pretty extensively about inflation, and I'm one of the few advisors here on YouTube that speaks extensively about inflation. Reason being, inflation actually plays a large role in retirement and retirement planning. It's often the background beat of retirement planning. An advisor may say a sentence or two about inflation, but it really is a critical number, and it really is critical to calculate that number accurately for future inflation. The second reason is because as a nation, we've recently come off of a round of inflation. Between 2019 and 2024, we experienced about 20% inflation. And I think all Americans are feeling that. Now, that a lot of that had to do with what happened in fiscal policy during COVID, but inflation is part of the U.S. economy. Personally, I think there's more inflation in the future. We're in for a second round of inflation, but it plays a huge role in people's financial planning, investment planning, and retirement planning. So what can you do as a recent retiree to plan for inflation? Stay with me. First, I'm a harsh critic of early retirement. And one of the reasons, there are many reasons, but one of the key reasons I'm such a harsh critic of early retirement, save people with pensions or extraordinary circumstances, is inflation. Okay, if you retire at age 50, and I'm calling early retirement anything between 50 and 62, there are more years of life that you have to make your money extend to. And during those more years of life, you're going to see greater inflation. Every 25 years or so, at 3% inflation, the value of the dollar halves. So if something can buy, like you can go out and purchase, I don't know, something for $1 today, that same dollar will have 50 cents of the purchasing power 25 years from now. Now, when you're 50, you probably have another 25, maybe even another 25 beyond that years of life if you're fortunate enough to live to 100. And most people would have a difficult time absorbing the impact of watching their financials dissolve from $1 down to 1/4 of its purchasing power. And that is the power of inflation over time. Now, if you retire at, let's say, 65 or 70, there's simply less years of life left. Let's say you have the good fortune of living to 100. If you retire at 65, we have to worry about 35 years of financial planning. If you retire at 70, 30 years of financial planning. But if you retire at 50, we have a whole half century to contend with in financial planning. Now, most of my retirement planning ends at age 90 or 95. I do have clients who've had the good fortune of living beyond that, but the reality is there are more people than ever living longer than ever, and inflation is a huge factor in when and how you can retire. Next is with dealing with inflation, don't become overly conservative in investing. Now, some people, I have clients who are very risk aversive, and at retirement, they want to put everything into CDs or treasury bonds. I have to peel them back from this plan, and the reason is inflation. For the time being, when this video is going up in January or February 2025, you can still find some pretty decent CDs that exceed the rate of inflation. But for a long time, the rate of inflation exceeded the rate of return of CDs. And essentially, if you put your money in CDs over the long term, your overall financials sees a reduction in purchasing power over time. Maybe over 12 months it's not that big, but if you do it again and again and again and again and put your money in CDs over 10 years, you're basically losing value on your money because it's not keeping pace with inflation. Now, to get around this, it depends on the client, but typically we look at putting at least part of the client's financials into the stock market, and hopefully the returns on the stock market will be high enough so that it can give them a decent rate of return, but it can also soundly beat the rate of inflation, so their money is growing over time. So I know it's very tempting, especially for people who are risk risk aversive or people who who don't really understand inflation and its impact and its relation to things like treasuries and CDs. But for most people, it doesn't make sense to sock everything away in either treasury or CDs at retirement. Even though the balance may be going up on that account, you're actually losing money over time because you're probably not going to be able to consistently exceed the rate of inflation. Being flexible in your budget and being able to rein in portions of your budget. Now, during 2019 to 2024, when we saw this first spike of inflation, many of my clients are wealthy, or high net worth, or ultra high net worth, so they didn't really feel much of a blip. Now some of my clients are starting to feel blips, and it has to do with the insurance rates here in California. I've had retired clients who've seen their home insurance go up by 30, 40, 50%, and that's really, really hard for most people to absorb, especially retirees. The people who can successfully deal with retirement are people who can rein in parts of their spending. Instead of buying name brand coffee, can you buy generic coffee? Instead of taking 2 trips a year, can you instead take 1 trip a year? Instead of keeping a car 5 years, can you keep it 10 or 15 years? These are compromises that people will sometimes have to make in their lives due to just general economic conditions. And my clients who can reconcile making those changes and will make those changes fare a lot better than the people who are super rigid and cannot make any changes in their budget. Also, the people with super tight budgets who are living right up against the bumper really will struggle in retirement because inflation starts really pecking away at the person's income, and the person didn't have that much overage to be able to absorb sharp increases in insurance rates due to local fires or sharp increases in groceries during inflationary periods of time. So being able to have slack in your budget and being able to rein it in at retirement, super important for dealing with inflation. Review your insurance. Are you getting the best deal? Now, I would do this with caution, especially if you are in a part of the country where insurance policies are being canceled left and right. But if you feel you have a good relationship with your insurance company and you're in an area of the country where insurance is not being canceled, it may be time to review your insurance policy to see if you really are getting the best deal. Now, sometimes it's just a phone call to your current insurance company. And I've had some people call their current insurance company or talk with their current insurance broker, and they were able to save several $100s a year because they found out they had an unnecessary insurance, or they were paying too much for this, or the insurance, they had their auto and umbrella policy with the same company, and they just weren't bundled. They just weren't bundled for discounts. So sometimes it could be a conversation with your existing insurance company. Sometimes it's conversations with other insurance companies just to check rates and just to make sure you are getting the best deal. Great way to fight inflation if you're not in an environment where insurance policies are being dropped left and right. If you are in an environment like California where people are hanging on to their insurance by the skin of their teeth, I wouldn't go poke the bear. I've had clients that have said if they basically sneeze too loudly or cough too hard, they're going to lose their insurance because all of their neighbors have lost their insurance. Don't go to the insurance company and ask about discounts. You're probably not going to get it, and you may raise questions or suspicions into your policy and get unnecessary scrutiny of your home insurance. So be careful with that one. Canceling unused subscriptions. We all have them. It's an easy way to save money in the budget, and I encourage people at the end of every year, so the time between December 26th and December 31st, to review all of their subscriptions and cancel out the subscriptions on the year that you're either not using or not planning to use in the next year. It's a great way to fight inflation because sometimes people are able to save several $100s just on that action alone. So take a look at your overall budget, take a look at your spending, and cancel out subscriptions that don't make any sense as a way of fighting inflation. So this is a bonus one, and this is a little bit complicated. This is the concept of leverage. And leverage is basically borrowing money to make money. And I have some clients who are really big into leverage. When interest rates are at historic lows, they would borrow money at 2 or 3%, and then they would put it in the stock market when the stock market was returning 18, 19% a year. Now, it's a very risky maneuver, and I generally advise people, unless they have an extreme risk tolerance, against that strategy. Reason being, when interest rates rise and when that money has to be paid back at a higher interest rate, or the stock market isn't returning what you thought it returned, it can quickly take you under. I do have some people who are close to retirement who are big fans of using leverage, either to go out and buy real estate, to buy income generating assets, to invest in the stock market, or to invest that money to grow a business. By time you get into probably your 50s, your early 50s, you really need to look at your behavior around leverage. And especially when you are getting close to retirement or you are in retirement, that may not be the best time to utilize leverage to go out and purchase additional assets because of the risk levels that doing that will require. Leverage is really impacted by inflation. So, if you are using leverage in retirement, you probably should talk to a financial advisor to see how to back down from that position of leverage, or how to wind up your leverage, how to pay off your leverage. I know a lot of people who borrow money are struggling now because interest rates are high, and they weren't expecting interest rates to rise as sharply during 2022 as they inevitably did. So there you have it, from a financial advisor's perspective, some ways that you can fight against inflation. Tell me what you like. Tell me what you don't like. And if you found this information useful, please like, share, and subscribe.